Hello everyone, I am Ben Contreras, and welcome to another episode of Ben Talks About. And as you can no doubt tell from the shirt that I'm wearing and the figure that's right in front of us, we are taking a look at another one of the figures in NECA's Godzilla line of figures. And of course, as you can no doubt tell, this is going to be based on the version of him from the quote-unquote recent Godzilla movie, Shin Godzilla. But this figure in particular is actually the special beam effect version of this guy. But before we get into any of that with the figure, I want to go ahead and talk about the box first. As you can no doubt tell, the box is basically has the same sort of mentality that my previous video on the 2003 Godzilla has, where it has the picture, it has the poster for the movie that it's based on as the front cover of it. As you can see, there's also the opening flap right here, showing the figure in the sort of setting that it's in. And as you can see from the front right here, there's that's that fiery background from one of the probably the best scene in the whole movie, right there. And from the side, you can see another side view of the poster, and then on the back of it, you can see it in the more poses for it. So yeah, as you no doubt tell, as I said before, this is the special beam effect version of the character. But before we get into that sort of quote-unquote gimmick, I want to go ahead and talk about the figure without it. And this is, out of all the Godzilla figures I have, this one is by far the most distinct looking, nonetheless. Without a doubt, mostly due to this version of Godzilla's really weird design. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you watch the film and sort of understand why he looks the way he does here, but I do still think that, especially compared to the other Shin Godzilla figures, this one is definitely one of the best ones in terms of overall sculpting. However, one thing about it that's sort of rubs me the wrong way is the paint job that they have on the spines. As you can tell, as you haven't seen the film, spoilers I guess, but Godzilla's atomic breath that he has in this film is actually colored purple rather than it traditionally being colored blue. So these of course have that same sort of glow for it that it does in the movie. However, I feel like they could have went for a more sort of vibrant, darker shade of purple rather than this more faded, whitish sort of purple that they have. And also, when you look at it from the back, you can see that the bottom of all of the spines are just colored the same plain white, and that just looks very, very odd. And that sort of style goes throughout the rest of the spines and all the way towards the tail. Speaking of which, the tail is by far the weirdest out of all of the NECA figures, because as you can see right here, all of them are perpetually bent in this sort of like jaggedy kind of pattern. So you're basically forced to keep the tail constantly standing up. I mean, it makes sense considering it basically does that all throughout the movie, but it does sort of hinder the type of poses that you can actually get with this guy, as you no doubt see right there. Yeah, the tail is pretty much perpetually, especially this area right here, this area is perpetually constantly jutting out this way. So there's pretty much no way that it's possible to get this figure having its tail completely flat. Which is kind of odd, but I sort of understand why that's the case. With that in mind, the articulation on this guy is pretty good, but out of all the NECA figures of Godzilla, this one probably has the weakest in terms of overall articulation. The legs pretty much move the same way that all the other ones do. The knees, of course, have the same sort of that same sort of hinge joint that all the other figures have, but like them, the knee joints are, excuse me, the knee joints are still very, very stiff, so I wouldn't really recommend posing it in that sort of way. But yeah, the feet are still on the same sort of ball joint as all the others. The arms, considering how overly tiny and stubby they can't do a whole much in terms of overall posing. It feels like they're on some sort of a ball joint, so you can get some movement out of them, but you're not really gonna have them be as like out there compared to all the other figures that you can get in this line. The head is actually one of the better sort of heads that the that these have, because this is all like similarly to the 1954 Godzilla. It's all on one solid sort of piece. It's not like covered by any sort of like thing that's sort of hindering it, like the 94 or 2003 figure. So you're able to move its head really rather well, and the head is also on a separate ball joint. So that's actually really good. Now, with that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about the main sort of gimmick that this figure has, and that being its beam effect parts right here. The beam effect, these laser beam effect pieces that they have, I'm not really the biggest fan of how they look, because again, in the film it has that sort of purplish kind of tint to it. But if you look at these, they're almost completely like pure white. It only has like a slight tint of more of a pinkish kind of purple rather than an actual purple. So yeah, I feel like they could have been a lot more sort of vibrant with the color scheme that they have. And as you can see right here, the tip of the tail, or not the tail, the beam piece is like this sort of like translucent white, and that goes for both the beam effect pieces that it comes with. And I'm not quite sure why that's the case. But let's go ahead and attach these, actually attach these. Now, unlike all of the other figures that come with this sort of beam effect piece, like the ones like right here, instead of it being like this sort of like that sort of like slotted kind of piece, it has this little tip right here that you actually plug into the figure's mouth right here. And sometimes these that can actually be a bit more of a pain than the regular ones, because yeah, it's kind of hard to get it in there, and I'm not quite sure if you can see that well, but the beam piece actually doesn't go all the way through to his mouth, so you can see there's just this little tiny like gap that you see connecting his mouth and the beam piece. So, I mean, it's not, when you're looking at it from a distance, it's not too much of a hindrance, but it still just seems kind of odd. Now, of course, if you've seen the movie, you would know where the other beam effect piece goes, right here, and as you can see, there's this little tip right here on his tail, so that you can actually have the other beam effect piece coming out of its tail, which this is a cool looking display on its own. However, I wouldn't necessarily recommend actually keeping it on display with this if your shelves aren't like oriented properly, because when you're having this alongside other figures next to it, this version of it takes up quite a lot of space, mostly because of the beam effect pieces. Which, you know, despite it looking really cool, it does sort of hinder the kind of where exactly you can actually put it alongside all the other figures. I mean, again, if you have your shelf like oriented properly, you can make it look really nice, especially if you have like stuff to like reenact the scene where he actually uses his beam effect parts. But on its own, I would much prefer just having him posed like this so that he can more easily fit on a shelf with other figures. Speaking of the other figures that we have, for comparison, right here I have the NECA figure of Godzilla 1954, which is, seeing these two be together is kind of goes to show how far they've come in terms of, like, you know, Godzilla having a drastic redesign compared to how he's more traditionally portrayed as. And for the other comparison, I have my previous figure that I had talked about, which was the NECA 2003 Godzilla from Tokyo SOS. Right here, as you can see, Shin Godzilla is actually way shorter compared to him, which again isn't really that accurate at all, considering this Godzilla is actually was actually the tallest out of all the Godzilla figures that we saw, Godzilla portrayals that we had seen until the anime trilogy version of Godzilla almost completely dwarfed over Shin Godzilla here. But Yeah, overall, this figure is really cool looking, and I'm really glad that I managed to actually find the figure. If you're looking for a good Shin Godzilla figure, this is definitely a good one to pick up. However, I feel like you may actually be better off getting the standard version of him as opposed to the beam effect version, mostly because of you know, as you can see, pretty much going as a sort of tradition with all of the other special effect versions of these repaints of these figures. They don't necessarily look their best without like the pieces that make them, you know, this exclusive version. But as I said before, with them having these sort of pieces, it makes it a bit harder to have them fit on like a shelf alongside all the other figures. And also, one thing about this figure is that because of the way it's molded, his mouth is perpetually just open and split apart like this. There's no way to actually close his mouth up, which the standard version of the NECA Shin Godzilla actually does. But I'm still really glad that I got this figure, and if you manage to find this somewhere, whether it be at Walmart like I managed to find it, or online for a really good price, then, you know, go ahead and pick it up while you still can, considering these figures are probably going to be harder and harder to come by in the stores. But again, online shopping is always a thing, so you can always just find it there. But yeah, until I see you all next time with possibly another one of these figure reviews, or, you know, certain topics of other stuff that I would really enjoy talking about. Until I see you all next time, I'm Ben Contreras, and bye.